Welcome to the Bladtcast. Very excited to be joined by not one, not two, but three members of Desert Dragon who, first and foremost, very important, their website is Desert Dragon Official. They've got a great new album out, and there's two songs they've released that we'll talk about, Lock and Load and Swamp Thing. But for our visual audience, our StreamYard audience, our YouTube audience, we'll go clockwise and we'll let these gentlemen introduce themselves. Why don't you go first, Greg?
Hi, I'm Greg Patnode. I've been with Des Dragon, kind of formed it in about 2011 or so, and a few changes along the way. But we got our newest album, Side of Heaven, and probably the best one yet, I would say. And Mike, you want to take it from there?
Sure. My name is Michael Smith. I'm in Desert Dragon. I started about 5.5 years ago. And I'm a keyboardist, and in the context of the last album, I did a lot of the writing and co-producing. Keith?
You unmuted me. Awesome. I was afraid there for a minute.
No, yeah. I don't. There might have been like a truck driving by. I wasn't really sure what it was, but the microchip in your brain was sending out a signal that we didn't want. So we wanted to make sure that we quiet that down.
You got me back on that one, Christian. Good to see you, man. Yeah, KSJ, alias Keith St. John, and we're here to introduce this Desert Dragon record and talk about it, and hope everybody loves it. And you guys might know a little bit about me from some past bands if we talk about that, but mostly we're here to talk about Desert Dragon today.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely get to that. So the band Desert Dragon, anybody who's heard the band, even if they're just hearing one of the new songs for our podcast audience, you heard some on the way in, you'll hear some on the way out. I think that they'll hear kind of a mix. Definitely there's a classic rock feel, a little bit of country, blues rock, and in the notes for the band they even mentioned that there is a hint of progressive, which I hear in there. It's not full-blown Yes or Marillion or anything like that. But Greg, as the one who founded the band, and or of the three of you here, the one who's got the longest tenure, talk about how those sounds kind of came together and what some of your personal influences were that led to that.
Well, I like mixing it up a little bit, not having everything sound too similar. You were saying the progressive side. I mean, I like Yes and Rush and all that stuff. It's definitely in my blood. And the more hard rock stuff, Van Halen, Black Sabbath, Aerosmith, love that stuff. Of course, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. Trying to get think, because most people in the rock genre love those bands. So I go, well, let's have a new type of music that kind of puts a little bit all of it into the songs, and that's what my thought was when I first put this thing together, and I think it turned out okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's there was a moment in time where, if somebody liked rock and they wanted to listen, when radio stations weren't programmed by a machine somewhere in, like a corporate office somewhere. And it was like, now it's everything is divided so narrow. There's like all this niche, like I like hard rock. I'm going to listen to this channel on satellite radio. I'm going to listen to this playlist. Right. And I'm only going to really hear that. But, they're like, you go back 30 years, it wasn't entirely unnatural. Yes, you were going to hear classic rock artists. You were going to hear your Aerosmith. Then you might hear Def Leppard. You would hear Metallica when they broke big. And then it was also like, yeah, but let's not forget about like Skid Row. Let's not forget about those bands. And yeah, I mean, growing up, just listening to what was essentially a classic rock station where I grew up in New York State, but all the bands you're talking about, I would hear Marillion. The only reason I know them is that they would play them occasionally, very rarely. But you'd hear Yes. And I think people in general aren't like, I only like progressive rock. I only like classic rock. And I think that we've gotten to a place where it's probably subconscious, where you just kind of select that sort of familiarity. And I think it's great that there's definitely sort of a mixture in there. Michael, what were some of just coming up, when you started becoming a musician, what were some of the biggest influences on you?
I can go in order from being a early teen and discovering Chicago first off. And then from there, it was prog rock, actually. I went.
And we're talking like 25 or 64 Chicago, not Peter Cetera Chicago.
Well, yeah, no, we're talking the first 3 albums.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's what I kind of started with. And I started arranging horns and working with the jazz band at high school. And then I got into Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And that kind of took the jazz thing kind of further for me. And from there, I ended up getting into arranging and composing and film composition and all that kind of stuff. So I approach all of this more of a writer's point of view. That's kind of what I've always been, composer, writer, that kind of thing. I never sat there and practiced every day to become a great player. I was there to be a great writer. So that was, I grew up on all the same stuff that these guys did. Maybe a little more emphasis on the jazz and pop music and even Broadway and film music. So just a whole bunch of stuff, a great variety. And I love all of it. I can put Johnny Winter and Rory Gallagher and then put them on and dig them and then listen to some really quiet jazz vocalist. It's all the same music to me. I love all of it. So.
Right. No, exactly. And like I was saying, I feel like most people like a little bit of everything. What
Yes.
about you, Keith? What were some of your big influences?
Me, yeah, I'm probably a different kind of cat because I grew up around New York, and my parents weren't nerds, but they were pretty close. They were in the box, and but I went to a lot of Broadway plays and opera and all that kind of stuff growing up. So my early influences were more like Tchaikovsky and Rimsky-Korsakov and Stravinsky and all that. And it's too long of a subject matter, but I'm more into the Romantic period probably than anything else. And the same thing with rock. If you kind of identify with what that is, it's before everything goes 20th century and we try to go off and break all the rules. It's kind of the last place where everything is still sounds pretty favorable to the ear, but it hasn't gone atonal yet, but it's complicated. So anyway, the first sort of rock records I got was my aunt, I think, gave me a few records, and the first one was the Red and the Blue Beatles collection. So those were the two, those like 1962 to whatever, and then 60 whatever to 70. And, that was the first stuff I started listening to in that format, bass, drums, guitar, and vocal. And that was a pretty complete set of sort of the basic rules of what goes on in music composing, I think, for rock and roll and pop. And George Martin had a huge classical influence. And of course, he was really present in the Beatles stuff. So, I mean, I think between that and, all the kind of, Rodgers and Hammerstein tunes and stuff I was hearing as a kid, my mind got pretty opened up to a lot of, I don't know, maybe deep music. And some of the early Beatles was just simple and catchy as well. So, and then it just grew from there. I discovered Yes, pretty young, and Zeppelin and all that stuff. And I was composing music from a pretty young age. I just found my parents' old dusty piano and just started finding notes in my head and doing all that. Kind of like Michael. Michael was, primarily doing the same thing growing up.
Yeah.
More writing than listening, I guess. And I was kind of doing that too. My first instrument were drums. And back east, we had basements on the east coast of the U.S. So, my parents threw me down there in the basement. And I mostly had guys come over and we played when they weren't at home. And by and large, when you're a kid, the kids you're going to meet in school, I was lucky enough to meet a couple of kids who were pretty accomplished, pretty young at their instrument. So, that rubbed off on me too. Just the sort of, not competition, but the sort of camaraderie and the struggle to get better with guys that were in the same mindset, But we were definitely a little bit nerds too then, in a way. We didn't look like nerds because we looked scruffy and our hair started getting long, but we definitely were organized and like picking out pieces from albums and showing each other and going, hey, let's try doing something like this. And so that's me. I was just kind of a harebrained kind of guy writing tunes in the basement for a while. And
I think there's a lot to be said about being, music nerds, which isn't necessarily like the visual people think of, like the Revenge of the Nerds with the big thick glasses. But I think a lot of people, I talk about this on the show all the time. I growing up, I was a nerd for comic books and like Star Wars the same way I was for my music. I needed to have every band's albums, and of course my CDs were all alphabetized and you had the albums in order, and if I was missing one, I was like, I got to save the money to get that one, and you would just the way that you would sort of, it was almost like trading baseball cards or comic books or something. It's like, yeah, but have you heard this one? And I think when you soak it all up like that, the interesting thing you said, Keith, was sort of having a background in Broadway. And I mean, I'm from the East Coast too, and you just, whether or not you would right now think like, oh, I'm going to, go put on the soundtrack to South Pacific. You're probably not going to do that. But if you were to like look lyrically and think about those songs, they tell a story really economically and incredibly catchy. When I put this together to talk to the three of you, I didn't think I was going to mention, I'm going to wash that man right out of my hair from South Pacific, but I am right now. And boy, you get how she feels from that song. You know what I mean? And it's like, no, you're not going to write a song like that. But what you might pull from, whether it's that or God, Jesus Christ Superstar,
Oh my God.
And I mean,
well, it's really funny you mentioned South Pacific, because my mom was just sort of accidentally singing a song. I was talking to her last night and I was like, what is that from? And I guess it was one of sort of the B-sides from South Pacific. And she goes, South Pacific. I go, why don't I remember that? I played in pit orchestras, doing that show, 100 times. So I don't know how I missed that one. It's just funny that you brought that show up specifically, and Superstar was one of my favorites of all time for sure. And obviously Jimmy Page and Styx and a whole bunch of other people, tip the hat a little bit to the music in that on that soundtrack and stuff. And I mean, there's a lot of influence there. When you're around that as a very, very young kid, you've got this somewhere in your brain are all these melodies and concoctions back there. And, I think for me, that's what kind of maybe gives me the freedom to write a lot on the spot, which is kind of my hobby. What's what I like to do, So
Michael, you were saying that, a lot of your background is in jazz, and Greg, it seemed like it was a little bit more of a buffet table of music, a little bit of everything. And I think that even though, Keith is the newest member of the band, I think it really lends to the sound that, one has been developed by the band previously. And I think it obviously works really well together. So let me ask Greg and Michael, how does Keith first come on your radar? He mentioned in passing when we were going around doing our intros, some of the bands that he had worked with before. A long time with Montrose, and then I also saw Quiet Riot, Lynch Mob, Sweet, and Nazareth. Speaking of Jesus, so obviously it's it's a very specific voice you need for some of that kind of music. So how does Keith get on your radar? I'll ask you first, Greg.
Well, it was kind of a weird set of coincidences. Basically, I was over at the store and I had this girl that was in front of me, and she was wearing a David Gilmour shirt from the concert. And basically, she goes, well, I knew this person that was a singer and stuff. And so over at a place that we all kind of hang, Canyon Club, I met Keith. And then I don't know, 3 months later, our singer moved away. And basically we go, okay, well, we need another singer. and Rick, our bass player, says, "Well, I know this guy Keith St. John." And I go, "Why does that sound familiar?" And I'd met him at I think it was a Lynch Mob concert, and so called him up and we sent him the stuff, see what he thought about it, see if he liked it or not, and he seemed to like it, and then it kind of just built upon there.
Yeah, I know it's funny you mentioned the Canyon Club because there's several of them now. But for people not in Los Angeles, I don't want to give the impression that it's like deep in the mountains, but you kind of come down from the mountains, or you come from the valley, and it's a great mix. Like one night maybe you'll see an 80s 90s hard rock band, like I've seen Tesla there a couple times, and then it's Peter Noonan, Herman's Hermits, and it's and comedians play there even, it's a cool little venue that I think it would make sense that you guys just sort of cross paths there.
Yeah.
So Keith, what are your thoughts when you get approached? Obviously you'd known Greg before and probably been aware of his band. And what were your first thoughts when you were asked, hey, what do you think about taking on this role in Desert Dragon?
Well, okay, two things. First of all, Lance is saying thank you in the ether for his plug for Canyon Clubs. And my thing with Quiet Riot, just to make it clear, was really short. So I mean, I don't usually say that that much about my that whole thing and me actually being a band.
Then somebody should take it out of your bio. But I know you were with Montrose. You were with Montrose for a really long time, though.
Yeah. We went out and we played some shows together sometimes. But I was, it was clear I was just, at the time we were on different wavelengths. I mean, those guys are my buddies, and Frankie was a really dear friend, and
sure.
Miss Frankie forever. But I always agreed that we were just, and he did too, that I was just going to sub in when they needed a guy, when they were in between singers a few times. So
And they've been between singers quite a few times.
Yeah, it has been. But anyway, for me it was all about the music, and it always is. And maybe that goes back to, like I said, being a sort of a quasi music nerd. It's like, I just kind of want to hear the stuff and then make my mind up about that more than anything else, more than checking out a bio or Googling it and seeing what comes up, what they've done, and listening to the older material or whatnot. So so he sent me some stuff, and I thought it had a lot of really good potential, and I liked I liked what they had combined so far between mostly Greg and Michael's influence. There's some, Michael's a little bit, maybe he says he's a prog guy, but he also does a lot of maybe like I said, sort of like that romantic period, classical, romantic period Beatles-esque kind of stuff, which I dig. And then Greg comes up with these like total left turns that you don't expect, which is why we label it with a little influence of prog.
Michael, when it comes to, obviously
that intrigued me really. It's like hearing these sections of songs that I've never really heard anybody else try to put these two kind of sections together of a song. This could be really cool. And at the same time, I gotta say, there were some refreshing riffs that they put in there. Kind of reminded me of like old Free, or like and then maybe old Deep Purple, early Deep Purple. And this is the time period that I kind of really dug in rock and roll, that late 60s, early 70s stuff that I've never really got the opportunity to sing to that kind of stuff, in, let's say, the 2000s, once I've grown up and kind of been in more of these sort of metal or hard rock metal bands, I haven't really got the opportunity to sing a lot of that kind of stuff. So I was like, man, this could be a real breath of fresh air. And I guess that's how it started for me.
Michael, obviously, I'm sure you've worked with a number of singers throughout your career. What do you look for? What do you think is, if you have to it doesn't even have to be the single most important, but what are amongst the most important things if you're going to work with a singer? And feel free to highlight what you don't want from a lead singer if something comes
A
to mind
lead
immediately.
singer. Well, the one thing that's most important as a composer is that the lead singer sings it exactly how you want. With Keith, he does it exactly how he wants, and that's what gives it kind of the Desert Dragon signature at this point, is that he's doing where he thinks the melodies and lyrics should take the song. So Greg and I lay a foundation together through Greg's ideas and my ideas, and Keith takes what we do and takes it into a direction that where he sees it going. So now we've added, so he's not like a regular singer where I said, hey, do it exactly like I wanted it.
Right.
Keith is taking what we did and then reinterpreting it into his idea, which is going to be a little different than what we did. And so now we've gone to a very different place where we may not have been originally. And that's what gives it something unique and different that I like.
Well, it seems to me like it takes it somewhere that you weren't expecting it. It's
Exactly.
It's not like sing it the way that I wrote it. It's
Right.
more like, oh wow, I like that you didn't sing it the way that I
Yeah,
wrote it.
exactly. Is that my ideas are great. Keith's ideas may be a little more universal that he hits in because he's the lead singer. He's in front of a band. He's fronting a band every day of the week. He
Right.
knows what people in the front row want to see, want to hear, and how to address that. And I think that comes off in his studio work as well. So he's a really unique person in that way. That makes sense.
Keith, this is not the way they were talking about you before you popped on. So,
Yeah.
somebody has to tell you. They're putting on the happy
Just to
face.
clarify, I focus in the back row. I focus on those people mostly.
Well, you
All
want to
is
make
well
sure that
flowers.
they're enjoying themselves. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Greg, you talked a little bit about, bringing the idea to Keith about joining the band. So since you've had him with the band, I mean, do you agree with Michael that it just sort of went in directions that you weren't expecting, but, obviously in a good way?
Well, compared to our last singer, which he was a great singer too, but he had more stuff that he could do with his voice, I thought, and that more fit the form I felt like for Desert Dragon, and give it a bigger sound and a lot more bluesy sound, which I really dig. Gives the whole emotion, a different level to me when people can sing like that. And it's was like icing on the cake,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about, there's 2 songs that are out, and the album is available now. It's called This Side of Heaven, and it says it's available on all digital and retail platforms, which it's which is a great way to say that it's available, where you can pluck it out of the sky, or if you want to hold it the way that Greg just did for a visual audience. Whether somebody is on the vinyl kick or they still buy CDs, I do always like to be able to kind of flip through and, who produced track 6, and who's the guest saxophone on, you know what I mean? I'm always interested in that stuff. That goes back to being a music nerd.
Right.
And I guess digitally they'll give you the booklet sometimes, but it's never really the same. So it's like, if I can flip through it while I'm listening, but so we've got the album available, and there's 2 songs out now. Literally just before we started, Jody, the publicist, sent me Swamp Thing, so I had a chance to hear it one complete time all the way through. But I had been listening to the earlier song over the course of the last couple of days, Lock and Load. Let's talk. We can talk about the album as a whole, but let's start off with what those songs mean to really both of you. And it looks like everybody might be frozen, or you might just be sitting very still. We're going to see how this goes. Well, Greg just moved, Michael just moved, but I'm pretty sure Keith's actually frozen.
I'm moving.
Frozen time.
Yeah. But I'll ask you first, Michael. Let's start with Swamp Thing. And I assume, well, you know what? I won't assume anything. Michael, let's talk about your thoughts on Swamp Thing.
It's a fun song. It's meant to be a little silly. And that's the whole point. Greg had come up with this really great swampy guitar thing, and he had named it. That was the name of the track, Swamp Thing. And he had some lyrical ideas, and they were dark and silly. And we took it in the silly direction. And then we built a track up. We had a demo. Then Keith took it, and he made it. He took it from being our original version, I would say, would be more like two guys in Louisiana sitting on their back porch with chewing tobacco and talking about making little tales up. Keith took it and took it a little more towards New York City and King Kong, that movie. He took it in, it was a much more visual and more dynamic. That's how I would characterize it.
That's a good way.
Yeah, it's a great way of selling the song to very different markets right now.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
It's like back porch and big city streets.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Swamp Thing, Keith?
Yeah, I love it, man. I love Greg's riff that he came up with, man. That opens up that tune. I hadn't heard quite that riff. It really reminds me of like an old Leslie West kind of style of riff, and which, I grew up in New York, and I thought Leslie was always from like Memphis or something. Like growing up, I didn't realize he was in Queens, right next door. But he was a master of that blues rock guitar. And Greg really hit a cool riff on that one, with a tiny bit of progressiveness, maybe, but a la Led Zeppelin, where it just throws you a little bit, but then you're like, oh, cool. So, I already knew that this was going to be a campy song. And I thought, well, let's put a bunch of stuff in the beginning. So we got, a little jaw harp, and some crickets, and we really took it to Green Acres, but then the chorus now, we made the chorus a lot heavier. So the chorus is kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to compartmentalize, what a song, somebody else is going to think something different, but maybe if you could make a heavy metal version of Godzilla by Blue Oyster Cult, it has that vibe to it.
Yeah.
The chorus comes up and you start dancing, it's got hand claps and it's big, and
By the way, I would be all for a heavy metal version of Godzilla.
Yeah, well,
if the guys in Megadeth want to do a B-side, something like that.
A bonus track, man. We can still record one and fit it in there before everything comes out. But yeah, so we went through, and that's the one song that has some special effects, background stuff. The Doors did that. In Riders on the Storm, there's they've got some rain and lightning and all that stuff.
Thunder,
so we brought a little of that into Swamp Thing as well, and we're working on a video for this one. So we wanted to have all that kind of, like Michael said, sort of that old King Kong meets Godzilla, kind of like the funny, frightened crowd and all that stuff.
Right. That was.
And we'll see what happens when that rolls out. So look for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, those kind of sounds can obviously really, heighten, just sort of the listening experience. I mean, you mentioned Riders on the Storm, and immediately I thought of another Doors song, like Imagine LA Woman without the car driving in the beginning.
Oh, right.
If it didn't have that, it's such a completely different feel. And I think Swamp Thing definitely does that. And then so Lock and Load's been out there for a little while. I believe you have a lyric video for that, which is just so that people can find it. And I assume desertdragonofficial.com, that's where people can find everything.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit, Greg, about Lock and Load.
Lock and Load, that's kind of like one of my babies. I just needed something that had a really good driving force to it, and it has kind of a long intro to it, which kind of sets up for the main part of the verse. But I like that long intro. There was I think it was called Long Time by Boston, has this huge intro, and it's like I'd never heard that before, someone do that long of an intro, but it really kind of made it set up for the rest of the song and everything. And that's like, I think, my favorite Boston song of any of them. But Lock and Load is basically the way I get it nowadays is you hear people say lock and load, it's just you're getting ready to do something big. It's originally it was a military term,
Sure,
lock,
yeah.
pack your bolt, load your ammunition. But which in the video it has a bit of that and stuff too. But it's you're just ready to jump out of a plane, or you're ready to go on to stage of a sold out audience or whatever. You're just getting ready to do something big. So that's my kind of terminology of lock and load, and it kind of just rolls off the tongue nice. So
Yeah, and you reference the intro piece, and again, just when being a music nerd, you talk about little bits of music, and then you just start to think about songs that have great sort of buildups. Like the Guess Who's American Woman. There's the version where people hear it on the radio where it starts with the guitar, but then there's that slow part, where he spells out American. And probably the best known one is Van Halen's Eruption, Right Before You Really Got Me. And that's, of course, the beginning of their first record. And you're like, what am I listening to? So there's so much that can be gained just somebody listening from like, okay, what is this? When there's a moment where it's like, okay, now it really kicks in. And then, of course, radio stations that play commercials are like, well, let's get rid of that first 90 seconds, so we can squeeze in 3 more commercials.
Right.
But, yeah. What do you think, Michael, about Lock and Load sort of as a composition as a whole?
Well, I love the riff, that the energy behind the riff that Greg came up with. I think there's a lot of, I hate to use the word testosterone fueled, but it's that kind of thing. And then Keith took it and changed a couple things in the middle of it where he dropped the energy intentionally down, where it gets a little weird at parts. And so that counteracts this big driving thing. And then there's a little like a lift before the chorus where Keith dropped it down into this kind of a darker, quieter, it's very dark in that spot. And that's what I like about it, is there's some light and dark, and then it just goes crazy. At the end, the guitars just get out of control and they kind of take over the whole thing. So it's kind of a fun, I think the word would be uninhibited, joyous view of kind of hard rock, just like, let's go for it. Take no prisoners. Let's jam and have a good time.
Well, Keith, was there a moment where you're like, all right, in your mind, you're like, all right, watch this, I'm going to make it weird?
Oh no. And for me, when Michael says weird, it doesn't get atonal or there's no real big monkey wrench being thrown in.
Yeah, no, he's not talking like, minute
I
8
saw
Frank Zappa
I saw an
song,
opportunity to create a dynamic. I mentioned Tchaikovsky and the Russians and the Romantic period, and I think I go for dynamics a lot. So, I presented to them a different version of the pre-chorus. So we do like a broken down pre-chorus now with some phasers and stuff, and there's just some kick drum in the background, and you go into the guy's head. He goes inside, and there's like reckonings with his past, in his mind, and he's talk whispering, singing kind of thing. And then it kicks back into the Deep Purple thing in the chorus and just like plows. And it's an interesting combination, but I think it still sounds pretty commercial and catchy to me. So
yeah, no, and obviously, I mean, I think at the end of the day, you definitely want it to be catchy. I think it's the best songs. We're talking about songs getting stuck in your head earlier, and I think that's important. Greg, I wanted to take a moment and ask, because I saw in the notes for the album that you have a guest violinist who you're speaking about Zeppelin a little bit earlier. I guess that was also part of the Page and Plant No Quarter tour. So that song South Side of Heaven has the violinist, and wanted to give you a moment to talk about that.
Yeah, Adele Escalander. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right.
All right. Well, the reason why I asked you is because I wasn't sure how to pronounce it. And, I'm glad it's not just me.
Yeah.
It's Adele Escalander. So you got to put the accent on the first syllable. He's a buddy of mine, but
I feel like we needed an umlaut somewhere. That would have helped. Anyway, go ahead, Greg. Sorry.
Yeah. No worries. But it was another friend of Rick's, And well, we could use a really cool in this part of the song, like a more of a Middle Eastern violin thing going on, just to give it some, make it authentic, you know. And so we got to have him on that song, and he had played like with what the first violin on when Page Plant, you know, did their tour, and they here in LA they played the Forum, which is, I saw him. I didn't know he was going to be recording in my studio at that time, but
Right.
but I go, wow, that's really cool how they're doing that. You know, they had their little mini orchestra and stuff going in the background, and what a concert. It was a great concert.
Yeah, no, I would definitely, I would imagine. You know, I was reviewing the band's discography, and I think it was maybe your original EP. So I'm going to go a little bit further back, but I saw it was produced by Ron Nevison. And for people that don't know, Ron Nevison produced, you know, some of the best UFO records from the 70s. But then he also was sort of the guy that people went to in the 80s, was like, I want to get our songs played on the radio. So like, you know, Heart had the Bad Animals album, you know, Ozzy, The Ultimate Sin. And I've always been a huge Kiss fan, and I feel like the Kiss album that he produced, Crazy Nights, gets a bad rep. I will admit there's probably a little bit too many keyboards, but there's some amazing songs on there. And that was like Paul Stanley at his peak, when he could, you know, when he could hit those like, you know, glass shattering notes.
Right.
There's probably right when it started to go down was after that. But so I just wanted to know about getting the chance to work with Ron Nevison, even if it was only for, you know, I guess a few songs.
Well, you know, the cool thing about working with Ron, I'd won a contest, and so I was in Morocco at the time, but my wife picked up the phone and oh yeah, I'll give him the message, you know, have him call me or whatever. And he produced the EP. And I think one of the best things about working with Ron is all the crazy stories he had.
Oh, I bet.
He had some crazy stories. So he told me like this, I'll just do one real quick. So they're recording Ultimate Sin for Ozzy.
Yeah.
And so I guess he asked Sharon, where does Ozzy absolutely hate to go? And Ozzy said Paris. And he goes, great, that's where we're going to record it. So, you know, to keep his mind on the music.
Keep him focused, yeah.
Keep him focused, right. So after one of the sessions, they went down to the local pub or whatever and having a drink at the bar. And this girl that was next to him, she was pretty sloshed. So she fell off her bar stool and onto the ground. And so Ozzy tells Ron, he says, oh, I'm going to go help her up. And Ron goes, yeah, go ahead and help her up. So he goes over there and grabs her hands, tries to pull her up, and can't quite get her up. And he goes, Ron, I can't get her up. I can't get her up. And Ron goes, Ozzy, you can't get her up because you're standing on her hair.
So, you know, somehow when you started to say, oh, I have one crazy story, I'm like, well, this is going to be from Ozzy, isn't it?
Yeah, right. It always is, right?
Yeah. So wait, so I, you know, and that wasn't in the notes that you won a contest to have Ron Nevison produce the EP. That's fascinating. Yeah. I mean, first of all, what a great prize for a musician.
Yeah.
You know, if I won that, I'm not musically inclined. I'm like, all right, I guess I'm just going to get him to tell me stories about Ozzy, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
But how does that even happen, that there's a contest for Ron Nevison to produce for you?
Well, my wife put in for the contest, and I go, well, I've never won anything in my life.
Yeah,
I'm not going to win this thing. And I was like, you know, what a waste of time, you know. And they called and said that I had won, what is it, Best Rock Song of the Year, whatever, for Malibu Music Awards. And so I went down there, and they said, are you going to show up? And I didn't know I won. I go, yeah, it's right down the road. I'll show up. So I go down there, and they call my name, and I went up there and took the little statue or whatever, and then got a call from Ron like a day or two later, and or my wife did, and it was pretty cool.
What so what does that do in terms of obviously creating the songs? Do you feel like you at least got it in front of people, or you got people to listen who wouldn't have if it wasn't produced by Ron Nevison? Yeah,
definitely. That was the song Darkness Shines. That's the first one that I ever heard my stuff on the radio with, and it was pretty cool. And a lot of people, you know, verified that like, oh, was it Ron Nevison? I go, yeah. And you know, obviously he's done everyone, produced just about everyone, and so it couldn't be too bad. At least in the audio quality, he's a great mixer, great producer, and has a super great ear, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah, an album that came out. I think I was in like middle school when it came out. He produced the Damn Yankees record, which
Right.
when you think about, you're taking the elements of like, yeah, you got a little Night Ranger, little Sticks, and oh yeah, how about Ted
Nugent.
Yeah, and when you can put that together, and I don't know if High Enough was a #1 single, but boy, it was sure in the top 10. And when you can take those elements in 1990 and be like, yeah, well, you know, we got Ted
Right.
Nugent on MTV with a guitar solo, and you know, I have no interest in talking about Ted outside of music, but you know, when you see him just kicking a door and play a guitar, it's like, well, you're gonna watch, and yeah, so. Yeah, when you just you go through Ron Nevison, that must have been just an amazing opportunity, and so that was probably somewhere around like 10 years ago. If that was
Yeah,
the
that's about
EP
right.
was your first release, right?
Yeah.
And so the latest album is I had it before, I said it, I knew it, but see, they didn't send it to me, so that's why I couldn't remember the name. But it's called This Side of Heaven. Yeah, This Side of Heaven. So what number album is that? We can count the EP. I don't know why bands don't count EPs.
It's the
sometimes.
third one.
This is the third one. Okay,
yeah.
great. So and so it's out there everywhere. Are there currently plans? Are there hopes to do some live shows to help get the word out? What's the plan going forward with the album?
Yeah, basically we're just gonna see what happens, see what kind of interest we get, and
I mean, the Canyon Club better be interested after this. We've already given them a shout out. I'm giving them another one right now. They have like 4 Canyon Clubs, so that's a tour right there.
Yeah, right. And yeah, so
We're gonna do
a couple of people I've already given CDs to over there, those guys.
Okay, great.
So yeah, that's definitely right down the road for me. So it's a great venue. I love that place. But yeah, we'll see what kind of interest we get, and hopefully we get enough to make it work. We're all in kind of different places. I mean, Keith's usually all over the place, and the guitar player, he's over in Phoenix, and so just to try to bring everyone together for some rehearsals and stuff is probably going to be a bit of a chore, but who knows? Hope we get enough interest. We're going to make it happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And let me ask specifically as it comes to live performance, Michael, is there something from this new batch of songs, this new album, that you're like, this is what I'd really like to see how a crowd reacts to? If there's one thing, it doesn't even have to be one song. It could just be a part of a song. Is there something that you're thinking like this would be really fun to play live?
Absolutely. It would be the middle section, the instrumental section of No Way Back, where it goes into the cello solo. There's a little piano solo, cello solo, and then Keith pops in to start off the second verse. It's a really unique little spot in there, and it's very exactly what Keith was talking about earlier. It actually sounds like it's from the romantic period of classical music, and so that's something that I really look forward to doing, trying out live, and there you go.
And Keith, have you done any live shows, or have you just done studio stuff with the guys so far?
They had a couple of around town shows in the Valley around LA where we hadn't written anything together yet, or maybe we had stuff in progress, and so I sang through. We did some covers, but we also sang through a couple of the old tunes from the other records too, right. And it was just brief. I don't remember how many. That's a few years ago, and I I think one of them might have been a Canyon Club. So there's another
Yes.
plug.
Yeah.
Another
we'll
plug
just
for you,
we'll
Lance.
just keep saying it, you know. I mean, there's no reason not to try and get it out there. And look,
Lance-
you know, I mean, if you're working out a set list after this conversation, maybe you decide that hey, let's work up a cover from South Pacific. Why not? You know, maybe more likely, you know, something from Jesus Christ Superstar. But is there something from the new album, Keith, that really jumps out? Like, oh, singing this live would definitely be the way to go.
Well, I kind of almost forgot about that moment Michael was talking about because it's so unexpected, but it is so cool. In the middle of a song called No Way Back, it's almost got a big foreignery, feels like the first time kind of chorus, and then it just slides off of that. It just goes poof and out into, and it becomes, like he said, this single cello and piano piece. And then I think they just intended that to be an instrumental at first, but then for me, I heard it like I heard, you know, a Freddie Mercury guy somewhere in the middle kind of jumping in on it. And so I did that. And that song gives me goosebumps. So that one I like too. We have a song on the record called God Bless Miss America, which there were 3 songs on the record that we sort of gave to each other, you know, like Greg kind of kept the final word on Lock and Load on everything, and because that was his kind of baby. And Michael kept the, you know, he manned the reins on a song called Vulture City, and then I kind of had that same experience on the song called God Bless Miss America. So, yeah, naturally, I mean, that being something I put a lot of extra work in because I was kind of driving the ship. I'd love to see how that comes together because it's, you know, it's got a lot of play to it. And I hate to beat a dead horse, but, you know, hitting that romantic period of music where the chorus has got that, you know, major minor thing, kind of like somewhere between ELO and Styx and all those bands like in the mid 70s, like discovering how that could work in a really big way with a lot of harmonies, but still heavy guitars and stuff. You know, with that sort of 70s string section going in there, we'll have to figure out how we're going to play that. You know, there's a couple of moments on the record that's, you know, it's almost like you heard Kansas on the radio and you're like, how the hell are these guys going to do this live on stage as a rock band? And then you see them show up with, oh, you know, that guy's a violin player, and they got a couple other string players on the side, and they actually pulled it off really well. So, I mean, I'm hoping, you know, we can get that organized and actually pull some of this stuff off the way it should be pulled off.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that's always a testament when you're listening to an album and you're like, I got to see how they can pull this off live, you know. I mean, you know, you mentioned ELO. If there was ever a band, you're like, I don't think they could possibly sound like the record. But in any case, the band's website is Desert Dragon Official. The new album, This Side of Heaven, available everywhere. And, you know, to keep with the theme, sorry, I'm going to have to clear my throat, and there's no way to do it without, excuse me. And, you know, to keep with the theme, I know. The website for the Canyon Club is where the music meets the soul. So really, just send them each mention, and then you should get at least one show out of it.
You know, I love it.
In any case, I had to look it up because I knew they had a weird website. Greg, Keith, Michael, thank you guys so much.
Sure, thanks
our audio audience is going to get to hear Swamp Thing on the way out, and if you're our video audience, go find the video for Swamp Thing, and also for Lock and Load.
Lock and Load, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, guys. It was great chatting you, and whether it's the Canyon Club or anywhere else, I hope to catch you guys out at a show sometime soon.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely, it was great.
Sounds good, man. Thanks, Christian.
Absolutely, thank you, guys.